I am James Mitchell. For 12 years, I worked with the Central Intelligence Agency. Not the kind you see in films, not the glamorous side of spying with far-off lands and cocktails. I worked in a directorate not found on organizational charts, in an office handling operations so classified that most people in the agency don't know they exist. And in 1974, I got involved in the most brazen, most costly, most secret intelligence operation in United States history. We were going to steal a nuclear submarine from the Soviets that sat at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, 3 miles deep in international waters, while avoiding being detected by the Soviets. And with a cover story built by a billionaire nutcase. This is the story of Project Azorian, Project K-129. And this is the story of exactly what we found when we brought parts of that submarine up, because the truth that was released in 2010 when they finally declassified it, is not accurate. If you're listening to this, drop a comment telling me where you're from. Your city, your country, doesn't matter. Because what I'm about to reveal affects everyone on this planet. And I want to know that at least some people out there heard the truth before they decide I'm too much of a liability to leave walking around. Let me take you back to March 8th, 1968. That's the day everything started, though none of us in the CIA knew it yet. That's the day a Soviet Golf II class ballistic missile submarine designated K-129 was on routine patrol in the Pacific Ocean, somewhere northwest of Hawaii. 98 men aboard, 3 nuclear-tipped ballistic missiles in her tubes, all the secrets of Soviet submarine operations stored in her codes and equipment. And on that day, for reasons that still aren't entirely clear, K-129 disappeared. No distress signal, no communication, no warning. One moment she was there on Soviet naval tracking systems. The next moment, she was gone. Vanished into the dark waters of the Pacific like she'd never existed. The Soviets went crazy. They scrambled every asset they had, dozens of ships and aircraft searching an area of ocean the size of Texas. For weeks they hunted, using every piece of technology in their arsenal, and found nothing. The Pacific had swallowed one of their submarines completely, and they had no idea where or why. But we knew, or at least we thought we knew. I wasn't involved in the initial discovery. In March 1968, I was still in training, learning the craft of intelligence operations, studying Soviet naval tactics, memorizing the specifications of their submarine fleet. But the people I would later work with, they were the ones who figured it out. The United States Navy had a system called SOSUS, Sound Surveillance System, a network of underwater listening posts stretching across the Atlantic and Pacific, designed to detect Soviet submarines by their acoustic signatures. Thousands of hydrophones on the ocean floor, all feeding data back to analysis centers where technicians wearing headphones would listen to the sounds of the deep ocean, picking out the distinctive noises of submarine propellers from the ambient background of whales and waves and geological activity. On March 8, 1968, one of those hydrophones picked up something unusual. Not the sound of a submarine running normally, but something else. An implosion. The distinctive acoustic signature of a pressure hull collapsing under the weight of deep ocean. Something catastrophic happening to something large and metal, somewhere in the Pacific Northwest of Hawaii. The technicians flagged it. Analysts triangulated the position from multiple hydrophones. And naval intelligence put it together with reports of increased Soviet naval activity in the region. A Soviet submarine had suffered a catastrophic failure and sunk, and we knew roughly where it went down. The question was, what were we going to do about it? I joined the project in early 1970, almost 2 years after K-129 sank. By then, the initial analysis had been done. A specialized Navy deep-sea vessel equipped with cameras had located the wreck, photographed it, confirmed it was indeed a Soviet Golf II submarine, and documented its condition. The submarine was sitting on the ocean floor at a depth of approximately 16,500 feet. 3 miles down, in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. The pressure at that depth is over 7,000 pounds per square inch, enough to crush a human body instantly, enough to turn steel into something resembling tin foil. The submarine had broken into several sections: the bow section, the sail, the missile compartment, and the stern. But it was largely intact, which meant that everything inside, all the codes, the crypto equipment, the nuclear missiles, the classified Soviet technology, it was all down there, preserved in the cold, dark waters of the Pacific. And somebody very high up in the CIA had decided we needed to get it. They brought me in because of my background. I'd studied Soviet naval operations, spoke fluent Russian, understood the technical specifications of their submarine fleet. I was young, maybe too young, only 28 years old. But I was hungry, ambitious, exactly the kind of person they needed for an operation this insane. My first briefing was in a conference room in Langley that I'd never seen before and never saw again. No windows, no identifying marks, just gray walls and a long table where 5 men sat, waiting for me. I didn't know their names then, still don't know most of them. That's how these things work. "Mr. Mitchell," the oldest one said, not bothering with introductions. "What do you know about salvage operations?" "Nothing," I admitted. "I'm an analyst, not an engineer." "Good. That's honest. How do you feel about learning?" "Depends on what I'm learning to salvage." He smiled, thin and cold. "A Golf II class submarine, Soviet Navy, sunk in March 1968, currently sitting at 16,500 feet depth in the Pacific Ocean. We want you to help us figure out how to bring it up." I remember laughing, actually laughing because I thought it was a test, some kind of psychological evaluation to see how I'd react to an impossible scenario. "That's not possible," I said. "The technology doesn't exist. Even if it did, the Soviets would notice a salvage operation that size. The technology will exist by the time we need it. We'll build it if necessary. And the Soviets won't notice because we're not going to use a military vessel. We're going to use a commercial ship owned by a civilian mining company." That's when I stopped laughing. They spent the next 3 hours laying out the plan. It was insane. It was brilliant. It was the most audacious intelligence operation I'd ever heard of, and I was going to be part of it. The cover story was perfect. A billionaire named Howard Hughes, the eccentric recluse who owned everything from airlines to casinos, was going to fund a deep-sea mining operation. His company, Global Marine Development Incorporated, would build a massive ship called the Hughes Glomar Explorer, ostensibly designed to mine manganese nodules from the ocean floor. Manganese nodules were real things, potato-sized chunks of metal that littered certain parts of the ocean floor, theoretically valuable for their mineral content. A few companies had expressed interest in deep-sea mining, so the cover story had just enough plausibility to work. But the Hughes Glomar Explorer wouldn't be mining manganese nodules. It would be mining a Soviet submarine. The ship would be equipped with a massive mechanical claw, a capture vehicle that could descend to the ocean floor, grab the submarine, and lift it into a special well in the center of the ship. The entire operation would happen beneath the surface, hidden from satellite surveillance, hidden from any Soviet vessels that might be in the area. It was crazy. It couldn't possibly work. And yet, we were going to try. I spent the next 4 years working on Project Azorian. That's what we called it, a meaningless code name chosen specifically because it sounded boring, like 100 other classified projects that dealt with mundane administrative tasks. If anyone saw the name in a budget document, they'd assume it was something tedious and move on. My job was intelligence analysis and risk assessment. I studied Soviet naval procedures, tried to predict how they would react if they discovered what we were doing, analyzed their capabilities for detecting and interfering with the operation. I worked with engineers who were designing the capture vehicle, helped them understand the layout of a Golf II submarine, what sections were most valuable, what we should prioritize if we couldn't get the whole thing. And I worked with the team that was building the cover story, making sure every detail of the mining operation looked legitimate, that if Soviet intelligence investigated Hughes Glomar Explorer, they would find exactly what they expected to find. A foolish billionaire wasting money on an impractical deep-sea mining scheme. The ship took nearly 4 years to build. It was massive, over 600 feet long, equipped with a derrick that rose 250 feet above the deck. At the center of the ship was the well, a giant opening that extended through all the decks down to the sea floor, covered by massive doors that could open and close. The capture vehicle, which we called Clementine, was a mechanical marvel, weighing over 2,000 tons, equipped with arms that could wrap around the submarine hull. I visited the shipyard once during construction, wearing a hard hat and carrying identification that said I was a consultant for global marine development. Walked around the hull of Hughes Glomar Explorer, looked up at the derrick, tried to comprehend the scale of what we were attempting. One of the engineers noticed me staring. Impressive, isn't it? Terrifying, I said honestly. Can it actually work? He shrugged. We've run computer simulations, tested scale models, built the strongest materials we could design, but nobody's ever tried to lift something this heavy from this depth before. We won't know if it works until we try. And if it doesn't, then we've wasted about $800 million in taxpayer money and built the world's most expensive failure. The ship completed its trials in early 1974. By June, everything was ready. The crew was assembled, mostly civilians who believed they were on a mining expedition with a core group of CIA personnel embedded among them who knew the real mission. The Soviets were still searching periodically for K-129, but they'd moved on to other priorities. The wreck site was in international waters, far from normal shipping lanes. It was time. I wasn't supposed to go on the mission. Analysts don't go into the field, especially not on operations this sensitive. But someone high up decided they wanted an intelligence officer on board who understood Soviet procedures, who could evaluate whatever we brought up, who could make real-time decisions if things went wrong. So in July 1974, I boarded Hughes Glomar Explorer in Long Beach, California, carrying a duffel bag and a cover identity as a marine geologist named Dr. James Morrison. I had fake credentials, fake publications in academic journals, an entire fake career built just for this mission. 3 days later, we were at sea, heading northwest toward the target site, steaming at a steady 12 knots while I lay in my bunk and wondered what the hell I'd gotten myself into. The first week was boring. Long days of ocean transit, nothing to see but water and sky. The civilian crew went about their business, maintaining equipment, running drills, acting like this was just another job. The CIA personnel stayed quiet, kept to ourselves, waited. I spent my time reviewing files on K-129, studying the photographs taken by the deep-sea cameras, memorizing the layout of a Gulf II submarine. I knew that boat better than I knew my own apartment, could navigate through it mentally, knew where the code machines would be, where the nuclear warheads were stored, where the crew quarters were located. And I thought about the men who died on that submarine. 98 Soviet sailors who went down with K-129. Young men, mostly, conscripts and officers doing their duty, serving their country. They hadn't wanted to die in the cold darkness of the Pacific, hadn't chosen to become part of an intelligence operation. They'd just been in the wrong place at the wrong moment when something catastrophic happened. We were going to disturb their grave, going to pick through their final resting place looking for secrets. It felt wrong, even though I understood the necessity, even though I knew that everything we found could save lives, could give us advantage in a Cold War that could turn hot at any moment. The Soviet Union and the United States were one miscommunication away from nuclear annihilation. K-129 carried 3 missiles, each with a nuclear warhead. If we could understand Soviet missile technology, understand their codes, understand their procedures, maybe we could prevent the war that would end civilization. That's what I told myself. That's how I justified what we were about to do. But late at night, lying in my bunk while the ship rocked gently on Pacific swells, I couldn't stop thinking about those 98 men. Couldn't stop wondering what their last moments had been like, whether they'd known what was happening, whether they'd suffered. We reached the target site on July 4th, 1974, Independence Day. Someone higher up had a sense of irony about that. The coordinates were exact, marked by a transponder that had been placed during the initial survey. We lowered additional transponders to create a navigation grid, set up the dynamic positioning system that would keep the ship stationary over the wreck site. Then we began lowering Clementine. It took hours. The capture vehicle descended through layers of ocean, through zones where sunlight faded to twilight, then to complete darkness. Past depths where human divers could survive, past depths where most submarines could operate, down and down and down until the pressure gauge readings became numbers that seemed impossible. I watched from the control room, crowded with engineers and CIA personnel, everyone staring at monitors showing data from Clementine's cameras and sensors. The room smelled like coffee and nervous sweat. At 14,000 feet, we started seeing debris on the cameras, pieces of metal, fragments of equipment, things that had broken free from K-129 as it plunged toward the bottom, the trail of a dying submarine. At 16,200 feet, the wreck came into view. Even on the grainy black and white monitors, even through cameras designed to work in crushing darkness, I could see it clearly. The submarine's hull covered in marine growth, lying at an angle on the sandy bottom. The sail, tilted and broken. The missile hatches, doors still closed. And everywhere, debris scattered around like the contents of a tomb. "Target acquired," the chief engineer announced, his voice steady despite what we were all feeling. "Beginning capture sequence." Clementine moved closer. The mechanical arms extended, reaching for the submarine like a giant hand. I held my breath, not consciously, just forgetting to breathe, as I watched history being made 3 miles below us. That's when everything started going wrong. The first problem was structural. K-129 had been sitting on the ocean floor for 6 years, exposed to crushing pressure, to cold that would freeze your blood in seconds, to corrosive salt water and the slow work of marine organisms. The steel hull that had once been strong enough to withstand the pressures of deep diving had been weakened, compromised, in ways we couldn't have predicted from surface surveys. When Clementine's mechanical arms began to close around the submarine's hull, we heard it. Through the hydrophones, through the communication systems transmitted up 3 miles of cable, we heard the groan of metal under stress. It sounded like the ocean itself was crying out. "Hold position," the chief engineer ordered. "Don't increase pressure on the hull. Let me check the stress readings." We waited while he consulted with his team, pointing at displays showing force measurements, structural analysis, predictions of failure points. I didn't understand most of the technical details, but I understood the expressions on their faces. This was going to be harder than we'd planned. "The forward section is compromised," he finally announced. "If we try to lift the entire submarine as a unit, the hull will probably fracture. We might lose significant portions during ascent." "How significant?" I asked, because someone had to. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too many plans fail. "Worst case, the submarine breaks into pieces during lift. We lose the stern section entirely, maybe portions of the missile compartment. Best case, we get the forward section and the conning tower intact." The CIA mission commander, a man whose name I still don't know, leaned forward. "The forward section contains the code room, the communications equipment, and the crew quarters. The missiles are aft." "Correct." "And if we prioritize the forward section, adjust the capture vehicle to focus on that area?" The engineer hesitated. Better odds, maybe 70% success rate for recovering useful intelligence material, but we'd have to accept losing the nuclear missiles. I watched the commander make his decision, saw him weigh the value of Soviet codes and procedures against the propaganda value of recovering actual nuclear weapons, saw him choose intelligence over optics. Focus on the forward section. We came for intelligence, not missiles. Begin modified capture sequence. Over the next 18 hours, Clementine worked to secure its grip on K-129. The mechanical arms, each one equipped with sensors and pressure monitors, carefully positioned themselves around the submarine's hull. It was like watching surgery performed by a robot 3 miles away, every movement calculated, every adjustment checked and rechecked. I took breaks to sleep, to eat, to walk the deck of Hughes Glomar Explorer, and breathe ocean air that didn't smell like coffee and electronics. During one of those breaks, I stood at the rail and looked out at the Pacific, smooth and dark under the night sky, and tried to imagine what was happening beneath the surface. Somewhere down there, in darkness so complete it had never seen sunlight, in pressure that would crush me like an insect, men in diving suits I'd never seen were attaching cables to a submarine that had been a tomb for 6 years. No, not men in diving suits. Remotely operated vehicles, mechanical hands controlled from the surface, working in conditions no human could survive. But there were men down there too. The bodies of 98 Soviet sailors, still inside K-129, preserved by cold water and pressure. We were going to bring them up, going to disturb their rest, pull them from the deep and into the light of day. I thought about their families, parents who had been told their sons died in a training accident, wives who had been given pensions and medals and lies, children who had grown up without fathers, never knowing the truth about how they died. Having second thoughts, I turned. One of the other CIA officers had joined me at the rail, a woman named Sarah Davidson, who handled communications security. She was maybe 35, with short dark hair and eyes that didn't miss anything. About the operation? No. About the morality of it? Always. She nodded. I read the Soviet files on K-129, the official ones they sent to families. Said the submarine was lost during routine patrol, crew presumed dead, no survivors. They never even told them where it sank. Because they didn't know where it sank. Exactly. So, in a way, we're giving those families something the Soviet government never did. We're finding their sons, their husbands, their fathers. We're bringing them home, even if it's not to the home they expected. That's a generous interpretation. Maybe. But it helps me sleep at night. She paused, looking out at the dark water. You know what's strange? The Soviets sent a ship through this area 2 weeks ago. Intelligence satellite caught it. They were towing sonar equipment doing another search for K-129. My blood went cold. 2 weeks ago. How close did they get? About 50 miles from our current position. They moved on after 3 days, continued their search grid in another direction. But James, they're still looking. After 6 years, they're still searching. Which means, whatever's on that submarine, they really don't want us to have it. Or they really want to make sure nobody finds it. Before I could ask what she meant, the public address system crackled to life. All personnel to stations were beginning the lift. The control room was packed. Engineers at their stations, CIA officers watching monitors, even some of the civilian crew who had clearance to be there, though they didn't know what we were really doing. As far as they knew, we'd found some kind of valuable mineral deposit and were testing the recovery systems. The chief engineer stood at the main console, his hand on a lever that controlled Clementine's ascent. All systems green. Capture vehicle secure. Beginning lift on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. He pulled the lever. Somewhere 3 miles below us, powerful winches began to turn. Steel cables, each one tested to hold hundreds of tons, began to take up tension, and K-129, after 6 years on the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, began to move. The first hour was agonizing. We could track Clementine's ascent on the monitors, could see the depth readings slowly decreasing, but we had no visual confirmation that the submarine was coming with it. The cameras couldn't see past the capture vehicle's frame, couldn't tell us if K-129 was securely held or if it was slipping free, falling back into the abyss. At 12,000 feet, we got our first indication that something was wrong. "Tension anomaly on cable number 3, one of the engineers called out, showing significant variation in load. The chief engineer moved to that station, checked the readings. Could be debris shifting, could be structural failure in the submarine. Keep monitoring. Adjust tension on cables 1 and 4 to compensate." We continued the lift. 10,000 feet. 8,000 feet. The submarine was rising through zones where the pressure decreased, where the water temperature changed, where everything about the physics of the situation was shifting. At 5,000 feet, we heard the sound again, that groan of metal under stress, transmitted through water in cable and hull. But this time, it wasn't just groaning. It was cracking. "We're losing structural integrity," the chief engineer said, his voice tight with control. "The hull is fracturing." "Can we continue the lift?" the mission commander asked. "If we stop now, we'll lose whatever we've captured. If we continue, we might lose it anyway when the hull fails completely, but at least we'll be closer to the surface. Continue the lift, maximum safe speed." The ascent accelerated. The cables pulled harder, winches turning faster, bringing K-129 up through the dark waters of the Pacific at a rate that made every engineer in the room nervous. We could hear the sounds now through the hull of Hughes Glomar Explorer itself, transmitted through cable and structure. The protest of metal being asked to do things it was never designed to do. At 2,000 feet, the forward section of K-129 broke free. We saw it on the monitors, in the sudden shift of load on the cables, in the way Clementine lurched upward as part of its burden fell away. The stern section, the missile compartment, the engines, all of it separating from the bow and plunging back toward the bottom, leaving us with only the forward third of the submarine. "Status," the commander demanded. The chief engineer checked his displays. "We've lost approximately 60% of the submarine mass. Remaining section appears stable. Continuing lift." "What did we lose?" "The missiles, the reactor, most of the crew quarters. What we retained is the forward torpedo room, the code room, and the conning tower." I felt sick. We'd come all this way, spent all this money, risked an international incident, and we'd lost most of what we came for. But the chief engineer was right about one thing. What we'd retained was the most valuable part for intelligence purposes. The last 1,000 feet took an hour. Slowly, carefully, we brought the remains of K-129 up through the final layers of ocean, past depths where sunlight still penetrated into the afternoon light of a Pacific summer day. When Clementine finally broke the surface inside the well of Hughes Glomar Explorer, when we could see the battered hull of a Soviet submarine dripping seawater and covered in 6 years of deep ocean growth, the control room erupted in applause. We'd done it. We'd actually done it. The recovery crew moved quickly. The massive doors beneath the ship closed, sealing the well and hiding our prize from satellite surveillance. Pumps activated, draining the water, leaving the submarine sitting in a dry dock 3 miles from the nearest land. I was part of the first team to enter the well, to actually see K-129 up close. We wore protective equipment, not because of radiation risk, but because we didn't know what kind of biological hazards might have accumulated during 6 years on the ocean floor. The smell hit me first when I climbed down the ladder, salt and rust and decay, the distinctive stench of death. The submarine's hull was worse than it had looked on monitors. Corroded, cracked, covered in marine growth that had colonized every surface. The pressure of the lift had opened seams that leaked water and oil, but it was intact enough to enter, intact enough to search. The hatch was jammed. We had to use hydraulic tools to force it open, metal screaming against metal. When it finally gave way, we shined our flashlights inside and saw what we'd come for. The interior of K-129 was a frozen moment from March 8, 1968. Equipment still at stations. Charts still on plotting tables. And bodies. Everywhere. Bodies. The Soviet crew had been killed instantly when whatever catastrophic event happened. Some of them were still at their stations, hands on controls, faces preserved by cold water and lack of oxygen. They looked like wax figures, like something from a museum exhibit, except they were real. They had been real men with real lives, and now they were evidence in an intelligence operation. Sarah Davidson was with me in that first entry team. I heard her breath catch when she saw them. "Jesus Christ," she whispered. "They're all so young." They were. Most of them looked like they were in their 20s, maybe early 30s at most. Boys, really. Boys who had been sent to sea in a machine that had killed them through some malfunction or accident or equipment failure that we still didn't understand. We documented everything, photographed every body, every piece of equipment, every scrap of paper. The code room was intact, the encryption machine still in place, the code books still filed in their storage lockers. This was the intelligence treasure we'd been seeking, the reason for the entire operation. But it was the personal items that got to me. Letters in pockets, photographs of wives and children and parents, a wedding ring on one sailor's hand, a religious icon clutched in another's fingers. These weren't just Soviet submarine crews. They were human beings who had loved and been loved, who had hopes and dreams and fears. We spent 3 days searching K-129, cataloging everything, carefully removing equipment and documents and remains. The CIA technical team dismantled the code machines, photographed the documents, collected samples of everything from hull plates to electrical systems. And we prepared the bodies for burial. That was never part of the official operation plan, but the commander made the decision anyway. We couldn't keep the bodies, couldn't return them to the Soviet Union without revealing what we'd done. But we could give them dignity. We held a burial at sea on July 15, 1974. 6 Soviet sailors who had been identified, placed in weighted bags, committed to the deep with a ceremony that borrowed from both American and Soviet naval tradition. A chaplain read prayers in Russian and English. We played the Soviet naval anthem, and we let them go, back into the Pacific that had taken them 6 years ago. I stood at the rail and watched the bodies sink, 6 dark shapes descending into blue water, and thought about the irony. We'd pulled them from the deep only to return them, as if the ocean had some claim on them that we couldn't override. Sarah stood beside me. "Why did we do this?" she asked quietly. "The burial. We could have just disposed of them." "Because they were sailors," I said. "Because regardless of what uniform they wore, they deserved respect, and because maybe someday someone will do the same for us." We brought Hughes Glomar Explorer back to port in late July. Mission accomplished. Prize secured. The submarine section was transferred to a secure facility where analysts would spend years studying it. The codebooks were rushed to cryptography teams. The equipment was reverse engineered, and the world never knew. The Soviets continued searching for K-129, never knowing we'd found it. The press never learned about Project Azorian. Even most of the CIA didn't know what we'd done. For 36 years, the operation remained secret. One of the most successful intelligence coups of the Cold War, hidden in plain sight. But here's what we didn't tell anyone. What remained classified even after the partial declassification in 2010. We found something else on K-129. Something that wasn't in any intelligence assessment, wasn't in any Soviet inventory, wasn't supposed to exist. In the code room, secured in a locked safe that we had to cut open with torches, we found documents, not code books, not operational orders, but reports, written in Russian, describing something that the K-129 crew had encountered during their patrol, something in the water, something that shouldn't have been there. And when we read those reports, we understood why the submarine had sunk. We understood why the Soviets were still searching after 6 years. We understood that what killed K-129 wasn't a mechanical failure or an accident. It was something else entirely. The documents we found in K-129's safe were marked with a security classification I'd never seen before. Not the standard Soviet designations for secret or top-secret materials, but something else, a handwritten notation in Russian that translated roughly to "Eyes of the Admiral only. Do not file." There were 12 pages total, typed on Soviet military forms, signed by K-129's captain, Commander Vladimir Kobzar. The first page was dated March 7th, 1968, one day before the submarine disappeared. The last page was dated March 8th, with a timestamp of 7:42 hours local time. We didn't translate them immediately. Protocol required that all recovered documents be sent to the CIA's Soviet Analysis Division, where linguists and intelligence officers would process them through proper channels. But I was there. I spoke Russian, and the mission commander wanted to know if there was anything time-sensitive, anything that might indicate the Soviets knew about our operation. So, I read them. Right there in the secure hold of Hughes Glomar Explorer, still smelling the salt and decay of a submarine that had been at the bottom of the ocean, I read Captain Kobzar's final reports. And what I read changed everything I thought I knew about K-129. The first entry was routine, a status report describing the submarine's patrol route, weather conditions, crew readiness. Standard stuff that every submarine commander filed regularly. But the second entry, dated March 7th at 14:30 hours, was different. Sonar contact at bearing 270, range approximately 2,000 meters. Contact does not match any known vessel signature. Acoustic profile, unlike any submarine or surface ship in Soviet or American inventory, attempting to classify. I felt a chill reading that. K-129 had detected something in the water with them, something their sonar operator couldn't identify. The entries continued, becoming more detailed and more disturbing with each page. 15:45 hours. Contact maintaining parallel course at constant range. No response to active sonar pinging. Passive acoustic signature shows low-frequency oscillations, not consistent with mechanical propulsion. Recommend alerting Fleet Command. 17:20 hours. Attempted to change course and speed to break contact. Object matched our maneuvers exactly, maintaining 2,000-meter separation. Senior sonar technician reports acoustic signature creates interference with our own equipment. Communications with Fleet Command intermittent. 1900 hours. Captain's observation. Whatever is tracking us possesses capabilities beyond any known technology. It is not a submarine. Movement patterns suggest intelligence and purpose. Crew morale deteriorating. Request permission to surface and break contact. I stopped reading and looked up at Sarah, who had been reading over my shoulder. Her face was pale. "What the hell was out there with them?" she asked. "I don't know, but it gets worse." The entries from March 8th were frantic, the careful military language breaking down into something approaching panic. 03:30 hours, object closing to 500 meters, still no visual contact, but sonar shows massive displacement, approximately 3 times the size of this vessel. Hull is experiencing unusual vibrations. Multiple crew members reporting hearing sounds through the hull like, here the text was crossed out, then rewritten, like singing. High-pitched tones that cause severe headaches and disorientation. 5:15 hours. Engineering reports unexplained power fluctuations. Reactor temperature increasing beyond normal parameters. Backup systems failing. The object is directly beneath us now. Sonar technician claims it is looking at us. I have no explanation for this statement, but I see the same pattern on the displays. It is as if the object is using some form of sensory capability we cannot comprehend. 6:30 hours. Emergency. The object has made contact with our hull. Physical contact. We can feel it through the entire submarine. The sound is unbearable. Crew members are suffering nosebleeds, severe headaches, some reporting hallucinations. 3 men have lost consciousness. We are attempting emergency surface procedures. The final entry was barely legible, as if written by hand in extreme distress. 7:42 hours. Hull integrity failing. The object is, I do not have words. It is pressing against us, or perhaps we are being pressed against it. The metal is screaming. Water is entering through seams that should not be opening. We are too deep to surface now. The reactor, God help us, the reactor is going critical. I can hear my crew dying. I can hear them screaming through the compartment walls. Whatever this is, whatever we encountered, it is not from any human nation. Tell my wife I love her. Tell my son I died serving the motherland. Do not let anyone else come to these coordinates. Do not. The entry ended there. No signature. No final words. Just an abrupt stop, as if Captain Kobzar had been interrupted mid-sentence, or as if the submarine systems had failed completely at that moment. I set the documents down with shaking hands. Sarah was staring at me, waiting for me to say something that would make this make sense. This can't be real, I said. This has to be some kind of psychological warfare, disinformation, something planted in case we ever found the submarine. You don't believe that? No, I don't. We brought the documents to the mission commander immediately. He read them, his expression never changing, then carefully placed them in a sealed envelope marked with codes I didn't recognize. This information is now classified under special access protocols, he said quietly. Neither of you saw these documents. Neither of you read them. They will be transferred directly to a compartmented analysis team that operates outside normal CIA channels. You can't be serious, Sarah protested. If there's something out there that can destroy a nuclear submarine, that can cause the kind of effects described in these reports, we need to know about it. The Navy needs to know. Someone needs to investigate. And they will. But not you, not me, not anyone on this ship. This operation was about recovering Soviet military technology and intelligence. We succeeded in that mission. What we found beyond that scope is someone else's problem. People died, I said. 98 men died because of whatever that thing was. And you're just going to classify it and forget about it? He looked at me with eyes that had seen too many secrets. Mr. Mitchell, the CIA has been operating for nearly 3 decades. In that time, we've encountered things that don't fit into official categories. Things that can't be explained by conventional understanding. We have protocols for this. We have people who handle these situations, and the protocol says that when we find something like this, we seal it, we classify it, and we let the specialists deal with it. What specialists? What are you talking about? I'm talking about the people who deal with anomalies, the things that fall outside normal intelligence work. They have been around longer than the CIA, longer than most countries. They will take those documents, they will investigate, and they will determine what happened to K-129. But you and I will never know what they find. That's how this works. He dismissed us, sent us back to our quarters, while he arranged the transfer of the documents through whatever special channels he was referring to. Sarah and I stood on the deck of Hughes Glomar Explorer, watching the sun set over the Pacific, and tried to process what we'd read. Do you think it's still out there? Sarah asked. Whatever killed K-129? The submarine sank in 1968. We just pulled it up in 1974. If that thing was still in the area, we would have detected it. We had sonar running constantly during the operation. Unless it didn't want us to detect it. I didn't have an answer for that. We returned to port, were debriefed, signed new non-disclosure agreements that specifically mentioned the documents from the safe and forbade us from ever discussing them. I went back to my normal CIA duties, analyzing Soviet naval operations, preparing reports on submarine capabilities, doing the mundane work of intelligence analysis. But I couldn't forget what I'd read. Couldn't stop thinking about Captain Kobzar's final words, about 98 men dying in the dark, while something pressed against their hull and their reactor went critical. I started researching, carefully using only open-source materials, looking for any similar incidents, and I found them. The USS Scorpion, lost in 1968, just 3 months after K-129. Official cause, unknown, possibly torpedo malfunction. But the wreckage showed anomalies, unexplained damage to the hull, crew remains found in positions suggesting extreme trauma before the submarine imploded. The Soviet submarine K-8, lost in 1970. Official cause, fire in the torpedo compartment. But survivor reports mentioned strange sonar contacts before the incident, equipment malfunctions that couldn't be explained, sounds through the hull that had no identifiable source. The French submarine Eurydice, lost in 1970. Official cause, unknown. No survivors. Wreckage never fully recovered. But French naval records I obtained through back channels mentioned radio transmissions from the submarine just before it disappeared. Transmissions describing an underwater contact that should not exist. And there were more, dozens more, going back decades. Submarines from multiple nations, all lost under mysterious circumstances, all with unexplained elements in their final moments. Something was in the oceans. Something that didn't show up on conventional sonar, that could destroy submarines with apparent ease, that naval forces around the world had been encountering for years without public acknowledgement. I tried to find out more about the specialists the mission commander had mentioned, asked careful questions, followed paper trails, used my CIA access to search through classified databases, and I found nothing. No department that handled anomalies, no special team assigned to investigate unexplained phenomena, nothing that suggested anyone was actually looking into what happened to K-129, which meant either the whole thing was buried so deep I couldn't find it, or nobody was investigating at all. In 1975, I left the CIA. Officially, it was for personal reasons. Unofficially, I couldn't continue working for an organization that would encounter something like what we found on K-129 and then just file it away and forget about it. I spent the next 40 years trying to learn the truth, contacted other intelligence officers who had worked on similar cases, found a few who were willing to talk, off the record, about unexplained incidents they'd encountered, built up a picture of something vast and disturbing operating in the world's oceans, something that every major navy knew about, but nobody would publicly acknowledge. And I waited for someone to take it seriously, waited for a government to admit that there were things in the deep ocean that we didn't understand, that posed a threat to anyone who ventured too far into the dark waters. But it never happened. K-129 was officially lost due to equipment malfunction. Project Azorian was partially declassified in 2010, with the story carefully edited to remove any mention of the documents we found, any hint that the submarine's loss was anything other than an unfortunate accident. The truth was buried, filed away, forgotten, except by people like me who know better. I'm recording this now because I'm 78 years old and I won't live forever, because the story needs to be told even if nobody believes it, because those 98 Soviet sailors deserved better than to die in the dark at the hands of something their government refused to acknowledge, better than to become a footnote in a classified intelligence operation. Captain Kobzar's final words were right. We shouldn't have gone to those coordinates. We shouldn't have disturbed what was down there. And we definitely shouldn't be sending submarines, civilian vessels, research ships into the deep ocean without understanding what else shares that space with us. I've seen the patterns. I've tracked the incidents. And what I can tell you is this: whatever killed K-129 is still out there, still in the oceans, still occasionally making contact with vessels that venture too deep or stay too long in certain areas. The navies of the world know this. They have protocols, restricted zones marked on classified charts, standing orders about how to respond if crews report certain types of sonar contacts. But they don't tell the public, don't warn civilian vessels, don't acknowledge that there's anything in the ocean beyond, fish and whales, and the occasional unexploded mine. Because if they admitted the truth, if they told people what's really down there, it would change everything. It would raise questions that governments aren't prepared to answer. Questions about what else we don't know, what else has been hidden, what other threats exist that we've been told don't exist. Sometimes, I wonder if Captain Kobzar's sacrifice meant anything. If those 98 men died for nothing, their final reports sealed away, their warning unheeded. I like to think that somewhere, someone is taking it seriously, that there's a team of people working on the problem, studying it, trying to understand what those things are and what they want. But I don't know, and that's what keeps me up at night. I'm releasing this recording with copies of the documents I managed to keep. They're not the originals. Those were taken by the mission commander and disappeared into whatever classified system he mentioned. But I memorized them, transcribed them from memory years ago, kept them hidden until now. Someone needs to know. Someone needs to continue asking questions, because the Pacific Ocean is vast. The world's oceans are even more vast. And if what we found on K-129 is accurate, if Captain Kobzar's reports are true, then we're not alone down there. We've never been alone. And whatever shares the deep with us, it's not friendly. The Soviet Union fell in 1991. The Cold War ended. The geopolitical reasons for operations like Project Azorian became historical footnotes. But the things in the ocean didn't change. They're still there, still interacting with vessels that venture into their territory, still occasionally destroying submarines and ships for reasons we can't comprehend. I've heard rumors, unconfirmed reports from people who work in naval intelligence, that the incidents are increasing, that whatever these things are, they're becoming more active, more aggressive, that there have been close calls, near misses, situations where ships barely escaped. If that's true, then we're running out of time. Time to study this phenomenon, time to understand it, time to develop defenses or protocols, or whatever we need to coexist with what's down there, or time to stop going into the deep ocean at all. That's my warning. That's what I learned from Project Azorian, from K-129, from 40 years of watching and waiting and trying to find answers. The ocean is not empty. It's not safe. And there are things down there that are far more dangerous than any human weapon we've ever created. This is James Mitchell, former CIA intelligence officer, witness to Project Azorian, keeper of secrets that were supposed to stay buried. If you're hearing this, if you're reading this, know that what I've told you is true. Every word of it. And if you ever find yourself on a ship in the deep Pacific, if your sonar picks up something that doesn't match any known signature, if you hear sounds through the hull that shouldn't be there, remember Captain Kobzar's final warning. Do not investigate. Do not try to make contact. Do not stay in that area. Surface immediately. Get as far away as you can. And pray that whatever is down there decides to let you go. Because sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it follows. And sometimes, like with K-129, it presses close against your hull and screams until the metal tears, and the water rushes in and everyone aboard dies in the dark, 3 miles down, where nobody will ever find them, or at least where nobody should ever find them. We found K-129. We brought up her secrets. We read her captain's final words, and we learned that some graves should not be disturbed. I'm sorry, Captain Kobzar. I'm sorry we couldn't honor your warning. I'm sorry we couldn't tell the world what you discovered. I'm sorry your crew died as a classified footnote in someone else's intelligence operation. But I'm telling your story now, for whatever that's worth. May you and your crew rest in peace. May we learn from your sacrifice. and may we have the wisdom to stay away from the deep places where things we don't understand are waiting. The ocean keeps its secrets, but sometimes, if you listen carefully, if you read the classified reports and connect the patterns and follow the trail of unexplained incidents, you can hear those secrets screaming. That's what I hear now. Every time I look at the ocean. Every time I think about K-129. I hear 98 men screaming in the dark, and I hear something else too. Something that sounds like singing, high-pitched tones that cause headaches and disorientation, sounds that should not exist. The ocean is singing, and we should be afraid of what that song means.